Hi, welcome back to the book club for part two of our first reading of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. In this episode, we're going to be talking about chapters 17 through 20, and then we're going to be having discussion. And then at the end of the video, we'll give you your new reading assignment and, yeah, send you on your way. Enjoy. All right. So Chapter 17 is another break from the story. Bast offers his condolences, and Kvoth's like, that's fine, goes to get firewood. Bast and Chronicler make up, and Kvoth starts crying out of earshot.
Right. Yeah.
So the Chandrian just reek
Chandrian
of
just
alcohol.
reek of
Yeah.
alcohol. Got you.
They're
Yeah.
just boozers. There's just
Everyone's
there's
all
so much alcohol that it permeates the air around them.
everyone's all freaked out. They're like, "Oh my god, they're like super strong magic users. How can they turn flame blue?" And they're just like like hiccuping and just drinking a bunch.
They're basically Jack Sparrow. So I have a question written down here. How much do you think Voth's story, or that whole story in general, influenced the sudden loss of animosity between Chronicler and Bast? Do you think it was unrelated, or do you think the contents of his story made them realize that they should make up? And
That's interesting. Ooh.
or was it their inherent attraction to one another that made them realize they wanted make-up sex?
I was gonna say the sexual tension.
I mean,
That's interesting.
I mean, he's like a sexy goat man with sparkly blue eyes. So.
It's true. Because I feel like, I mean, there was definitely, I mean, the fact that he pulled the iron back, like, chapters before. He was like, okay, I'm not going to do anything to you. And then they just kind of calmed down. Like, they'd already kind of set up that they were going to calm, like,
Yeah.
they were in a calm state and they needed to talk it over.
Both trauma dumped.
Trauma dumped and they went, oh, okay, our issues don't matter. Do you good? Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then they made the sex eyes across the room at each other.
Yeah, and then and then Patrick and then Rothfuss wrote out a whole scene with them, but thought I better not, and just deleted it.
His editor was like, dude, you can't. I'm sorry. You've already used up your quota of saying the word whore. You get exactly 20. You can say it 20 times.
Once per chapter. Interesting. But yeah, that was a nice little interlude check.
Yeah, it was nice. And it was nice to see that even though Kvoth is hard, he is also soft. But like,
he's just soft boy.
Not like, obviously he is like a kind person, but like cause his initial like, oh no, it's fine, time heals all wounds. It's like, I mean, yikes, dude.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I actually felt better when he was crying. At that,
yeah,
like, I was like, okay, good. He has a soul.
He properly processes, as opposed to just shoves everything in the back of his mind.
Chapter 18.
Kvoth
puts his wilderness survival skills to use and dissociates. He dissociates, vegans out, and eats a mushroom. This week on Kvoth Gear, Kvoth dissociates. Kvoth becomes a vegan, and Kvoth eats a mushroom.
Kvoth copes for a while.
Well, I did write down a quote. There are times when reality is nothing but pain, and to escape that pain, the mind must leave reality behind. And I wrote that down not because it's poignant, which it is, but because it is the driving force of existential horror, or Lovecraftian style horror. The idea that the only way for our minds to handle some things is to not and to basically the only way to cope with a reality that makes no sense is to go into unreality.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. Parallel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for Quoth's case, um, I mean, his escapism became more so with the loot because he would play until like his fingers bled, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that was very interesting.
Chapter 19. Kvoth continues to survive in a wilderness for months. I didn't really pay too much attention to exactly how long it was, but I kind of clocked that it was
Yeah.
around 6 months that he was
Yeah.
out in the woods for.
Mm-hmm.
And he was essentially becoming one with his loot. Then the
Yeah.
strings broke, so
Yes.
he started walking south to find the city, or a city, where he could get new strings. After he avoided people on the road for a while, he is given a ride by father and son, Seth and Jake. And I was curious whether Patrick Rothfuss is the type of person to reuse names, or if this is the same Jake from the chapter 1.
I think that is an interesting catch about the I because I didn't catch on to the Jake thing.
So it's
Um,
perfectly possible that he just used the name Jake twice.
Perhaps, yeah.
Like you,
But I mean,
you see
these
that,
people
but
are probably going to come back in because I mean, I know we've only read one more chapter after this, but he's named them, so I imagine they're going to come back more.
I will say that assumption is not necessarily the case. I name characters in passing all the time just because it's
Just adds to the story.
adds to the story.
Okay.
How surprised
So
were you that they were kind? Like they just come up to a random kid on the road after all this, and they're
I
just
was
like
genuinely very happy, but I wasn't
genuinely
surprised.
great people. I mean, it's just usually they're not, like in fantasy, and everything
Yeah.
else is like the road is awful, like people suck,
Yeah.
and then this is like
Yeah. The whole town too is like I mean, in the next chapter they go into it, but the whole rest of the town is not great.
it kind of is like, oh, okay, nice, cool, good people.
Yeah. One little piece of,
I mean, I
positivity
know
and just
everybody
this
in the
sludge.
everybody in the caravan was good too, but like this is just a random farmer on a road with thousands. Um,
Nice to read about them.
the scale of the road was
Hmm.
confusing. He said it was the size of a wide river, or the width of a large river. Which,
Right.
I don't know if you've ever seen a large river, but they're
Hmm.
like a quarter mile across,
Yeah, yeah. Massive.
or even if it's half that size.
Yeah.
The widest road I've ever seen is that one in is it South Korea or China? That's like 18 lanes, and it's
Oh,
maybe a couple hundred yards at most.
yeah.
Like the scaling doesn't make any sense. This is another one of those like kind of exaggeration things that I don't know if that's intentional or if he's just didn't really think about it too hard when he was writing that.
I feel like part of that, to me anyway, like that, reading those exaggerations, I kind of just took it as this is a child, like he's speaking from his child's perspective.
He said it with such authority that if it was just like it was as if or whatever, or it seemed like, but no, he said it was this.
Yeah.
Like he just says it with such authority that it's a little like,
That's just wide ass roads.
I mean, and if I go into chapter 20, I wrote down that he describes the city of Tarbine, or however you say it, Tarbian.
Yeah, I said Tarbayan.
Tarbayan. He describes it as it would take a day to walk across. Now,
Yeah.
let me tell you, if you were to walk for a day, you would cross you'd cross half of Long Island.
Oh.
And that's like Long Island's like big. It's not even like the the bit from Spider-Man, the
Yeah.
game, like it's like
Yeah.
3 or 4 times bigger than that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what?
This place is fucking
you're
massive.
telling me this thing's 4 times the size of New York City, like one of the largest cities in the world, of which
Massive.
contains like 9 billion people or whatever, 8 billion. Another like,
Perhaps.
okay, that's wrong. That's not possible. Now maybe
That's
it's
fair.
really, really windy, but like that's clearly not what he meant. He was going for scale, but I
Yeah.
don't think it matters. It's just like I can't quite get the scaling of things in this.
That's fair. I mean, I think it's also betting on, I mean, who's like, I mean, I certainly didn't know the, like what you, like the comparison of what you gave of
Well,
Long
it seemed
Island.
so big to me. I was like, man, imagine walking across a city, an entire city. Would it take me an entire fucking 24-hour like day?
It is, that is a, yeah, if you think of it like that, that is,
Like assuming that I could walk the same rate for an entire day,
yeah.
or even just like if I was hiking for a day. Although maybe he means like a day's hike, which would be like maybe 8 hours. Let me actually read the chapter summary. So Seth, the older guy from the farmer, offers to let Kvoth stay on their farm, but Kvoth gets scared and goes to find some strings for his lute. Then he's beat up and his lute is broken, and he goes to sleep in an alleyway.
And I finished the chapter and I felt unbearably sad. I went, oh, this is where we picked.
Yeah,
Neat.
Nice.
This is the cutoff point that we said, yep, this is a good point.
We didn't
know.
We didn't know.
Yeah, just the shit that he goes through in this village town. I was like, oh my god, like, because you get a little
Literally
taste of
kick
this.
a guy while he's down.
Yeah, like, and it hurts more because he had that experience of meeting Seth and Jake, and they were so nice and kind to him, and they brought him in. Oh, they you know, he went on their cart or whatever and brought him in, and he thought about them too. He was like, oh, I remember they said I could come and visit them on their farm or something, and then he just tries to fall asleep by a bookstore entrance. The guy kicks him and he gets to go sleep by a crate, and I'm like, oh. Okay.
I will say, I don't know if he... well, actually, he said... At the end of that chapter, he said he was there for 3 years. So I'm wondering... I was going to say he could just wait like a week and they'd probably come back. But he probably did that in those 3 years. We'll see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he said that was the first night
first night of 3 years that he spent in the
first
city.
night of 3 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll probably, like, the next portion will probably be about his time in the city, and probably I'm hoping we'll get to Jake again.
Yeah. Discussion points.
Where do we want to start?
Oh, well, okay. How you liking it?
Very much. I enjoy the style of, like, being like someone listening to a story. So I actually do like the whole, like, first person perspective on that. I think the world's interesting. I like all the characters more or less. I have many questions about the Chandrian. But overall I'm really liking it, and I can see why a lot of people like this book. Or book series, I should say.
So what hooked me initially was actually the first chapter with the Skrull. It just, like, something, I don't know what it was, but I just loved that, just the introduction of that creature.
Yeah.
So it kind of has moved a lot away from that for now, which is a little weird, but
yeah, I'm wondering how they get brought into the story, like, from the story that he's telling, because I don't, like, they definitely don't seem of, like, their world. I mean, neither did the Chandrian, but
the Skrull,
what? Yeah. Welcome back. Also, oh yeah, the Unlurk command.
they feel to me like abominations,
Yeah.
as in something that was created that shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I will say it took me a little bit to get into it. The Scryl was interesting. Um, but I think I get really interested, I think more so with like I think one of the big things for me is characterization and just like how a character is presented to me. When Chronicler got introduced and they were able to meet, I was like, oh, this is the story. I now have a really good idea, and I like these characters already. So that drew me in because I was like, okay, now I
Right.
have this something to latch onto that this is where the story's going. But it was in, but like everything leading up to that was characterization, world building, and everything there.
He was
It
building
also
the
might have
wrong
been
world, though. He's building the world after the story.
right, which
Which is
is
a
an
little
interesting choice. Yeah.
Like, and again, we don't have any time frame for how long ago this story was.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting to think about that because that style is reminiscent to me of the kinds of stories you would see where you know the outcome, like the reader knows the outcome, and then the rest of the book is about what leads up to that outcome because that's the mystery of it's like, oh, why did this happen? How did it happen? Right? And typically, I don't really like those stories because I don't really like knowing the outcome and
I
then learning about
hate
it.
prophecy as a storytelling device for that exact reason.
Right?
I
Yeah.
I don't like learning how we got to something I already know. I
Yeah,
like
that's
not
exactly.
knowing where I'm going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they do this in the way that, I mean, we already know what the state of the world is. So it's not really like the book's not saying, well, this person died on the 8th of May and he was a hero, you know, and this
And the only thing we really
it just
know
presents what's
about the
happening right now.
story is that he lives.
Yes. He lives and there's spider demons.
Yeah, he kills a princess or whatever, angel.
An angel, yeah. So so I don't mind that. That I'm just like, okay, like I don't know enough, you know, as opposed to like a really good example of the kinds of that kind of like prophecy thing for like a hard-hitting outcome for me is the beginning of like Disney's Tangled, where literally the first line starts out where he says, "This is the story of how I died." And I went, "All right." I don't like okay, like I just didn't really like how that's how they're drawing people in.
Did he say that?
I was like, that's the very first line he says.
Did he die at the end?
He dies and then he's revived by her hair.
Oh, yeah, that's what it always is. That's always a bait and switch. It's always I die at the end of this, but actually I didn't.
But actually, and you wouldn't know that unless you read the story or watched the movie or yeah. So I like that this is subtly doing it as opposed to being hard hitting.
Yeah,
the outcome.
No, I think it's done really well. Mm-hmm. It feels less of it's not prophecy. It's just retrospective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Overall, how are you finding the book, by the way?
I'm liking
I think
it.
yeah.
It also took me a bit to get into, but not as in like I wasn't into the story, but like I wasn't at a point where I was like, I gotta read the next chapter.
Yeah, like, oh my god.
And I'm still not at that point, but I would attribute that to the writing of the chapter summaries. Because each chapter is bookended by I have to sit here and write for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier
Which
for me
I did
to
not
be
do.
like, okay, I'm done. I'm gonna go do something else for a bit.
Yeah.
But so my first note might be a bit funky, but I noticed he tends to move to go towards doing visual storytelling as opposed to introspective, or extrospective as opposed to introspective. So, like the voice is obviously omniscient. Like it describes what people are thinking around them to a degree, but it often feels like it's being perceived from an observer other than the speaker, or other than the the storyteller or the people in the story. It feels like it's being... It almost feels like it's being told by someone watching it happen. Which means the characters don't have a lot of internal dialogue. There's discussion of things that happen, like within, like, but it's not internal dialogue. It's more just thought process. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of like internal like monologuing, like,
right,
of like reacting to certain things. Which, yeah, that is interesting. Now, is that more apparent when he's telling the story or the present day?
Definitely more in the present day, but it's also noticeable in the telling of.
Yeah,
or at least I think so.
When Chronicler was saying like, I will capture everything you're saying, but I will make there will be like small edits throughout. Like, we're reading what like I assume would be what Chronicler's writing,
right?
And that style of writing, naturally, as a chronicler, like that is the style of annals and like medieval chronicles and everything. But there's a lot more emotion to this because it is also a story being told by Kvothe or Kot.
But most of the emotion is external, like described, not shown, or shown, not told.
Yeah. Oh, so like in terms of like Kvothe doesn't say. Well, I mean, he will say that he felt fear, but like, I think I know what you mean. Like, it's around like they're not saying I felt despair that weighed on me so heavily that I couldn't move. Where he just says, I couldn't move. I looked for something normal.
Yeah. He tells about what he did in response to it, not how he felt about it.
How he felt, yeah.
And I think that's just Rothfuss's style of writing. I don't think that's necessarily a voice that he chose. I think because I write a lot. I write introspectively, a lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
so it's very different from what I am used to writing. Mm-hmm. So that is why I notice it so much.
That's fair.
I will spend like half-page paragraphs talking about just what a person is thinking. Yeah, so the next thing I had was something I touched on earlier, which is that much like other epic fantasy writers, he seems to be like very preoccupied with sexuality. And I mean, we discussed a little bit why that might be, but it just feels like overkill a lot of the time. Like, it's like you could just like not. You don't have to.
Yeah.
There's no rule that says you have to.
Yeah.
Which it usually just makes me uncomfortable in stories.
Yeah.
Which is why I care mostly. But the other half of that is I feel like male fantasy writers spend like a lot of time talking about like female prostitution and stuff.
Yeah.
And that sort of like subservience, sexual subservience sort of side of things. And I realized I've never actually read a epic fantasy written by a woman. And I wonder if it's similar, the opposite. Maybe they talk about dicks the whole time. I don't know. Gigolos.
Yeah, just turn the tables. Yeah. Oh, how the turntables of. You know, it's kind of sad when I think about like my own my own experience reading it from a female identifying perspective anyway. In that it's, you know, I mean, just because it's so saturated into shows, TV, movies, books, that I just kind of read through it and I'm just like, yep, all right, yep, moving on, you know. Like it's almost like I block it out when I read it.
It always takes me out of the story. It's the exact opposite.
Jarring, right?
It's jarring for me. And this is true in anything. Like if if we're watching a TV show and two people start taking their clothes off, I'm immediately taken out of the of the narrative.
Yeah, which is, I mean, their intention is to keep people's attention with that visually. But it's just so out of the narrative. You're just like, oh, okay.
And it's not necessarily like it doesn't. Sometimes, a lot of the time, it doesn't fit. Sometimes it does fit, but it still doesn't feel. Yeah. It still jars me.
I find it interesting in that. Okay, I guess you won't look up. He'll have examples like that. And then he will, spend a good amount of time really developing, honestly, a very supportive, positive relationship, like with Kvot's parents. Like a very loving kind of, but also cheeky kind of thing. I liked their depiction of their relationship. I also know that Rothfuss is married. At least I believe he has a kid. He's a family, but it's just interesting that gets to me. I focused on that more than the mention of just oh, the prostitute's gonna take him into the tent. I was like, okay.
Well, it's just you get a lot of characters talking about how they like to have a good girl on their knee. It's like I was also gonna say, I just realized there's been exactly 2 women in this book. One of them is a prostitute, and the other one is
the mother. Yeah.
Written to seem very sexually open. I wonder.
Yeah, I did want to talk about
what was one of the Chandrian a woman?
Were they a woman? I don't think so. I don't recall.
I kind of clocked
they
that.
Focused on.
He said men and women, but I don't think he actually described any of the women.
I mean, we also still have yet to meet. I think meet
the angel,
the woman, the angel, and/or the woman who Kvothe falls in love with.
I think it's the same person.
Yeah, the woman who dies.
He falls in love with her and has to kill her for some reason, and
she gets possessed by a Chandrian.
Something like that. Yeah, it's the classic Jon Snow.
Jon Snow.
We shoehorned in the entire 8th season.
I do wish that there was some more variety.
It got so bad in the. I mean, fucking Sapkowski.
The Witcher?
Sapkowski. He's a fucking horn dog. It's ridiculous.
He is.
It got to the end, or by the time it got to the end, I was just quaking in my boots, terrified that someone was just going to sexually assault Ciri at any given point. That is just the general vibe of the story. It's just...
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. And it's... I mean, and it adds to the severity too, at least in Ciri's situation, because she's this young woman, and you know, I believe she's pretty. I don't actually know how old she is in the book, but
I think she's 16 by the end.
Fair. But it reminds me of just the sheer just the shakes and just gross feeling that I got when I watched the second last episode of The Last of Us show, because they have an example of they have sexual assault that doesn't fully happen, but it starts to happen, and I was like, nope, no thank you, don't like this, get this away from me. And I know it happens in the game too, which is a shame. I haven't played the game, but I've heard it happens. But yeah, I don't know, it's just uncomfortable. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
it's meant to be.
It's meant to be uncomfortable, but you don't need to put that in. This next one is interesting for me. I think you mentioned setting as well, and I don't know what you have to say on that, but
yeah, world building for me.
So most medieval fantasy seems to be set in some form of Europe. This one seems like it's set in the New World. They've made multiple mentions to things that I know for a fact do not exist in Europe and never have, or didn't exist in Europe until the 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have corn, they have squash, they have poison ivy. Just the way they describe the general nature. I don't know if you've noticed that at all, or if that's just me. I definitely squash and poison ivy are not at all native to Europe. So I mean it's a fictional world, of course, but like usually it's based in reality to a degree.
I mean, you basically said everything I wanted like that on that topic. Yeah, like it is set in kind of that new world setting, but not so much to the point of like it's still keeping to that kind of that like high fantasy.
Right.
You know?
It's definitely it has a medieval Europe feel to it.
Yeah.
And the only other note I had on that, the only other note I had was the one on grief portrayal.
Yes. Yeah, I want to talk about this one extensively. Tying into grief, like also bringing that back to
Just
that
emotion in general.
emotion. Yeah. So that was one of the moments that really drew me in really quickly, like more than I was like, oh, like I just like this. It was in the middle of the chapter. Was when Chronicler and Coat were talking, and Chronicler was talking about like the myth of this guy, and he was like, oh, I could tell the story, but when Chronicler's naming like, oh yeah, the woman, or the man who killed an angel, like I heard there was a woman involved, and then Rothfuss immediately goes into this really vivid description of Coates' reaction to hearing about this woman or about his past, and it's just the image that was painted. I was like, this is like I couldn't feel what he was feeling, but I could very strongly sense there was a lot here that he can't quite like process because he doesn't know how to really react when it's brought up. He probably didn't really think about it for a number of years. One of the more striking things that came from that like you and I also talked about it a little bit yesterday, but was that he was, it described the scene. He was like taking everything in, and instead of doing it like kind of that introspective, inner monologue kind of thing, he Rothfuss immediately went to describing that like the action that Kot wanted to do, and that Kot was looking for some normalcy. So he would be like, I saw fire everywhere, oh, but there's this barrel needs to be emptied, it has water in it, that's normal. And he focused on that, and that was his own coping based on what he'd seen, which was really fascinating and just very I could feel what
I found the passage you're talking about. I can read it.
Yeah.
So basically, Chronicler is telling Coat Voth about how his myth is being corrupted story, and he basically he tells him something and he like passes it off as it's whatever, and then he just keeps giving him more and more egregious things, and he seems to be Kavoth seems to be a little bit less sure of himself each time, and then finally he says, Chronicler took an eager step forward, sensing victory. Some people say there was a woman. What do they know? Coates' voice cut like a saw through bone. What do they know about what happened? He spoke so softly that he was supposed to speak softly. He spoke so softly that Chronicler had to hold his breath to hear.
Yeah.
They say Chronicler's words stuck in his suddenly dry throat as the room grew unnaturally quiet. Coates stood with his back to the room, stillness in his body and a terrible silence clenched between his teeth. His right hand, tangled in a clean white cloth, made a slow fist. 8 inches away, a bottle shattered. The smell of strawberries filled the air alongside the sound of splintering glass. A noise inside so great a stillness, but it was enough. Enough to break the silence into small, sharp slivers. Chronicler felt himself go cold, and suddenly realized what a dangerous game he was playing. So this is the difference between telling a story and being in one, he thought numbly. The fear.
Mm-hmm. Ah, so good. Ah.
It goes on, but I'm not going to read it all.
Yes. That was the main portion.
Oh, and this is the face of a man who has killed an angel.
I see.
So that was something Chronicler thought.
chronicler thought. Okay, so maybe not necessarily.
So it might be metaphor.
Maybe. Interesting. But yeah, he's just like Rothfuss does a fantastic job with depicting the kinds of emotions that he's going for. There's characters who we haven't gone necessarily in depth into. Like, I mean, I'm very interested, and I don't know if we'll get to see more of him, but in Ben. Because he...
I don't think we're ever going to see him again. I'm sure
right?
that was the last time we saw him.
Yeah.
He was a stepping stone character.
Yeah. Which is fascinating. I mean, I'm sure, like, his teachings will come back, like, be referenced a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he made a big influence on Kvothe, but he just seems like one of those characters who's going to be around to teach a lesson and then disappear.
It's like I have a lot of questions about characters, and I know it'll just get revealed as the story goes on. Like, I want to know more about Bast. I don't think we'll really get to learn much more about Chronicler, even though there is a story with Chronicler. We just don't have it. Other than that, he's royalty.
Any chronicles,
and he goes around. He is a patron to, or the
Baron.
The Baron is his patron. Yeah. To me, Chronicler is very much like the equivalent of an eager monk who is just, or actually a better comparison would be what are they called? A skald. Someone who just, like, in this case in Nordic saga literature, someone who is a storyteller who goes and travels and tells stories, and they enjoy doing it. I mean, it seems like he wants to kind of, I don't know, escape's the right word, but he doesn't go by his royal name, like his actual name. He just wants to go by Chronicler, and that's what he's also known as.
It didn't sound like he was unwilling to go by his other name. He just, nobody calls him that anymore, really. So he was just taken aback.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
Or like, oh yeah,
but
that's
like,
my name.
it wasn't like it didn't seem that it was like oh, this is a dark story that I am not telling you. And protagonist number one.
My thought on Chronicler is he is the audience. He is us.
Yeah.
It's the sympathetic character in the narrative as a whole, I think, is him.
Mm-hmm. And with the whole story will reveal like Kvothe's motivations. Like we already know his initial motivation is that he wants to learn. He's a child, and he wants to learn magic. Very specifically, they mention the power of knowing the name of the wind. So he wants, so that mastering that was probably going to be a big thing for him, if he does that. But so that'll be revealed, and so then we have Chronicler, which I agree, audience, that makes sense. Bast, I don't really know. Well, I mean, his motivation is to look after Coat. They seem to have a really close relationship. I don't know how, because we haven't gotten to that yet. Other than like apprentice master, maybe.
It feels a little bit like he is
mentor.
He is the Kvothe to Kvothe's Abinthy.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I mean, not so
like he was
literally,
teaching
but
fast. Yeah, but maybe he had some things that he could teach from his experiences. I don't know.
I also feel like there's a situation there where Kvothe rescued him from something.
Yes.
That feels like it has that sort of vibe.
Yeah, because I mean, he would have left whatever life he had to go live with Coat and run it in, from what I understand. Being royalty too. That sounds like a
he's running from
situation
something.
Where he's running from something. Yeah. Maybe there's something that Bast, like maybe the motivation of Bast is that being with Coat or Kvothe and learning from him and living with him or whatever is just gets him away from what he wants to be far from. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I wonder. I guess we'll find
Yeah.
out. Hopefully.
Yeah, I hope they get into it. I mean, they might take 2 books. I don't know. Yeah. And I'm so intrigued by the Chandrians. I really want them. And I don't know how much we will know because they seem kind of like intentionally vague.
Maybe not in this book.
Yeah,
If it
maybe
was
Wise Man's Fear.
intended to be a trilogy, then there's a good chance we won't understand them in this book.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of our first reading. Thank you so much for watching.
So next time we are going to be reading chapters 21 through chapters 41. And we're going to be talking about it on Twitch. We do that every other Wednesday on either of our channels at 7 o'clock. So feel free to stop by, hang out, and talk about the book if you're keeping up with it. Otherwise, we're going to be uploading all of our videos to this channel soon after. So, yeah, hope to see you in the next video. And I hope you enjoyed.
Hit that like button and subscribe.
Or ding that bell or whatever
ding
the kids say these days.
Bye.
Peace.
Peace.